Howdy everyone. So the last video that I made, I was debating on whether I was going to do one of these, and I decided, you know what? Why not? I figure I want to get more regular on producing content for those who are subscribed, because I know there's quite a high number of people. Um, but yeah, so I figure why not do a weekly power rankings, go over the race a little bit, and just talk about my opinions on stuff. Okay. So let's kind of get into it. I'm not too certain how I start this thing. I might just start away right away, getting into the rankings, and we'll go through each driver's race a little bit, or at least what was presented of it and what I remember of it. Because, to be frank, it wasn't really the most observant race, and those who tuned in as I was doing a race watch along knows that I was building some Lego during the race. So, yeah, let's get into it. We start with the teams that are definitely at the bottom. As you can see, I've kind of got my little version of my ranking system that I have in my power rankings videos that I produced. I've altered it a little bit to do a power ranking style to kind of match what you tend to see in most typical, with like a rating of like a 1 through 10 of just how good that driver did for the weekend. Of course, like a 0 through 3 means they have absolutely no place in the sport, at least based off of that weekend. If their ratings between a 3 to a 4.5, such as this first group of drivers are, that means they definitely need to improve. That is painful to watch. Even if you are in a bad car, getting bad performances is just difficult to watch. It's kind of a lot harder to defend. For example, looking at George Russell in a Williams a few years ago, he was driving a bad car, getting decent performances out of it. So if you're having a bad performance in a bad car, that still shows that even themselves as a driver, at least based off of this single race performance, need to improve. So in that category, we have definitely Ocon and Gasly. There's no denying Alpine have a bad car right now. That's not necessarily entirely on Ocon. If you saw my power rankings video, you'd seen I've got Ocon listed as a solid midfield driver, and Gasly actually of having a great season. He's probably a fantastic driver. But this race did not show that whatsoever, with both Alpines anytime they were under any sort of contention, such as my mind thinks to the clip, I think it was Danny Rick passing Ocon. Literally zero contest to it, doesn't even try to like hold him back. Like that's pathetic. Plain and simple. Like, I don't think it's necessarily on the drivers. I think it's the organization as a whole, and Alpine is awful. They need to do something to improve themselves entirely as a whole. The other two drivers, we have Logan Sargent. He is not really looking like he's off to a good start. Granted, the one issue, I guess, wasn't necessarily his fault. I guess there was an issue with the new wheel that they have at Williams. But even before that issue, there wasn't really anything good to show. Not necessarily jumping out in practice or anything like that. Granted, Albon didn't, but it was a little bit more noticeable that Sargent was still at the back of the field. And then Valtteri Bottas, he had himself trouble right at the very beginning. He like dove into Lance Stroll right away, and I don't know. Actually, yeah, he had like a bit of a broken front wing until the pit stop, and then they had that like 53-second pit stop change where he just wasn't able to recover. But that was kind of his own fault. There was really nothing good going for him. It was just bad to watch, and especially compared to watching what his teammate was doing, Bottas had a bad performance. In the next group of drivers, I've got were the drivers I had who did a solid midfield driver performance. In that group, I've got Zhou, Magnussen, Hamilton, Ricciardo, Hülkenberg, Tsunoda, Albon, and Stroll. Now, Stroll's a tough one in my opinion, because he had that incident where it wasn't through any fault of his own, and he did have himself a good recovery drive, but overall was just still getting outperformed by his teammate, was considerably slower. Just wasn't a good weekend for him, and good on him for having that recovery drive. It saved him from having an even worse performance, but there's still a long way to go for him. And there was a bunch of drivers who just had simply better performances. P15, I put Alex Albon. He was fairly. I don't know if I heard his name at all during the race. Yuki Tsunoda still has a lot of immaturity. Clearly, like the RB was touted to be a better car this year, and granted, they definitely are a better car than they were at the start of last year. But I think this is a little bit of a letdown performance for the team as a whole, for both Ricciardo and Tsunoda. And the whole incident at the very end of the race where Tsunoda didn't follow the team orders for I think it was 3 laps until he finally let Ricciardo by, at which point Max Verstappen had caught up and blue flagged, and then there was a 2-second gap to Magnussen, which Ricciardo did make up again and pulled away from Tsunoda. But this was a bad race. This was a bad race for Yuki. He still clearly has a lot of talent. Might even have better raw pace than Daniel Ricciardo, but his race form needs some work still, and he needs to. I don't know if he needs to see a psychologist or something like that, but he needs to be able to work as a team. I think he puts too much pressure on himself, and maybe this bringing in Ricciardo hasn't really helped him with that, as there's definitely now a team leader aspect that was going to Yuki's favor last year and now isn't. I think this is maybe mentally affecting him, especially during the races. Nico Hulkenberg, he had himself a good recovery drive. He broke his front wing. I don't know if that was... I never actually saw the clip. I don't know if that was his own fault, but I gotta give credit to him. He made those tires work after his race got ruined on the first lap. I know there's the whole thing of you don't win a race on your first lap, but you definitely lose it. He lost that race on his first lap and was just hoping for a safety car the rest of the night, and it just simply did not happen. But I got to give credit to him. He did a very, very good job of making those tires last. P12, I put Daniel Ricciardo. I think he had a very solid drive. He got slowed up a little bit by that Stroll spinning incident. He was one of the few drivers that was behind that had to stop essentially and get back into the race. And he did a very good job. I remember, of course, they were playing his team radios. Actually, were they playing their team radios? Well, I was seeing the team radios from how I was watching it through multi-viewer of him trying to track Tsunoda and Zhou's time to see if he could catch them. And I remember at one point thinking there's not a chance. And then of course at the very end he was right there with them. If he had gotten past, been given the ability to battle his teammate and then go past him as well as Magnussen, I don't think he would have caught Zhou, but he had a very good bounce back performance after a rough start to the race. All credit to him. Lewis Hamilton, didn't notice him really at all this race. Nothing really good to say. He was outqualified by his teammate, was outraced by his teammate, didn't really have anything special happening with him that I could really remember at all. Just kind of fit that middle of the field, and when I calculated the numbers out together, P11. Kevin Magnussen, I'm not going to lie, I did not notice him until that whole incident with Ricciardo at the end, but then I was just couldn't help but be like, whoa, Kevin Magnussen is in P12 right now. These were the cars we were expecting to be at the very back of the grid. He did a very good job managing his tires, and he outlasted Yuki Tsunoda, and then again, Daniel Ricciardo, granted on a shorter stint, but he pulled off the defense and made it look easy. In P9, I put Zhou Guanyu. He did a fantastic job with granted, I got to give a lot of credit to the strategy team of what's it called? Sauber. I'm gonna call them Sauber right now. But he did a fantastic job of making that strategy work. It's unfortunate for him that the tires kind of fell off at the end. And, well, as he was saying, I guess on the low fuel, they're not as good as some other teams, which actually makes sense given their qualifying performance as well. But their high fuel runs and pace and all that is very good. He did a great job of it. I thought he was going to run away from Stroll, but I guess once it switched to, low fuel situations, he just couldn't match what the Aston Martins have. But he had a very, very, very good drive. It makes sense that he got the best of the rest just outside the points. But in my power rankings, I think P9 is very fitting for Zhou this weekend. In my next group, I've got the drivers who I've got that would be normally categorized in my great season group. So all of those, like, they had very, very, very good drives for their teams. That's George Russell, Lando Norris, Charles Leclerc, Oscar Piastri, Fernando Alonso, Sergio Perez. So they all did very good. And I know what you're already going to be reading at. Sergio Perez at P8. It's one of those situations where, at least for me, the higher the expectations are, if you're not first, you're last, almost to a degree. The way the calculations and my formats go, there's such a big degree between second place and first place that it's tough. It's tough. Like, because, like, as looking at, like, P15, like, let's start. I'm sorry, trying to think of another example. If you're a team that's in the 5th place car, expected to finish P9, P10, and you finish P10, when you look at it overall percentage-wise, that's what, like 5-10% of a difference. If you're expected to finish P1 or P2, and you finish P2, that's, you're actually, so like split that between the middle, 1.5, and you finish 2, you're actually almost like 25% off. If I'm probably got the math in my head wrong, but if you're expected to finish P1 or P2 and you finish P2, it's not going to be close to as good as if you were expected to finish P3 and finish P2, because that's actually technically overperforming. Yeah, but that's what it is. That's how the math lines up. Basically, the higher the expectations are, the worse it is for you if you don't meet that. Granted, he didn't not meet it. It's just he didn't win. And if you're not first, it's a lot more penalized when you're in the obvious best car. Yeah, P7, I put Fernando Alonso. I actually think this was maybe a little bit of a disappointing weekend for him. I think especially after last year, the way the car was looking through testing and practice runs, I think they were probably wanting to be slightly more competitive. He had himself a good drive, got some points at the least, but I think they would have wanted more. Oscar Piastri, I think the McLarens, both him and Norris, basically did about as expected, if not a little bit better. I think if you had looked before the start of the race, you might have swapped maybe the Astons and McLarens for this week. I think I might have put the Astons a bit higher. That's part of where this variation comes from, at least a little bit. So I think the fact that McLarens outperformed themselves raised them up a little bit higher. P5 for Charles Leclerc. I think Ferrari was without a doubt the second best car, but he was getting extremely outperformed by his teammate and was not looking very, very clear against the Mercedes. I think the Ferrari was the better car than the Mercedes this weekend, but I think if Russell wasn't having that engine issue or power issue or whatever it was that he was having, I wouldn't have been shocked at all if Russell actually had beaten Leclerc. And with that being said, Russell actually managed to do P3. He did a fantastic race. P5, I think that's basically about, I think that's where he finished in the race. I think that's about as good as he probably could have done with that car. So he met all expectations. He had a very, very, very good drive. It's kind of hard to deny that. And then we have the final group of, this is a championship style drive, in my opinion, whenever they do this, is Max Verstappen and Carlos Sainz. So, obviously, Carlos Sainz probably not going to contend for the championship, but if this were a driver, like, in the midst of a championship battle, granted, it's race 1, we don't know what's going to happen, but that's the kind of drive you expect from a champion. Like, what he was doing, the battling with his teammate, overtook him twice, didn't get the priority and strategy, and he just said, I don't care, and went through. And, like, I wouldn't say, like, he almost made it look easy. This was an amazing drive from Carlos Sainz and absolutely showed he deserves to be in a top team. And then there's Max Verstappen, who did basically almost everything perfectly. Like, I tried to formulate out these rankings, so a 10 is the highest you can possibly get. And right now he's at a 9.87. So it's kind of hard to imagine. Like, the only thing I think ever so slightly lowered him is when I actually calculated out race pace. I think if it had gone for longer, granted Verstappen got himself so far away in the early runs, I think the Ferrari might have actually had better race pace on this track. Just Verstappen is next level. Give it a few more laps. I think Carlos would have beaten Checo. I absolutely think Carlos would have beaten Checo if they had a few more laps. I do think the Ferraris might have had better race pace. I just think Max was that next level. That's the only really thing that slightly brought him down was that. But then again, who knows? By halfway through the race, he might have been taking it easy. But the numbers don't lie, so that's what the ratings are, 9.87. So I also decided to do my own little kind of drivers. So we'll look at the driver of the day, the worst driver of the day, the driver that had the best recovery in the race, the driver who I think over-delivered on the result, and the driver who I think under-delivered. So with all that said, driver of the day, Carlos Sainz. He won it in real life. I'm giving it to him here as well. It's kind of hard to deny it. Worst driver of the day, Yuki Tsunoda, in my opinion. The way he ended that race is absolutely unacceptable. I think if it was middle of the season and his contract was like up for debate, he would have just gotten fired on the spot right there. Not necessarily fired on the spot, but he would have been told immediately after that race, you're not coming back next year. That was just unacceptable. And simply, I think at the same time, he could have gotten more out of that car. He should be out. He should have been able to pass Kevin Magnussen, but he wasn't able to. So that team order is absolutely justified. Best recovery drive, Nico Hülkenberg. His race got ruined in lap 1. Granted, I don't know if that was his fault or not, but he had a very good recovery drive. Could have been 2 laps down with Logan Sargent, but he wasn't. Had himself a decent little recovery. The driver, I think, actually over-delivered on the car, Lando Norris. I think, like I said earlier, I think I would have put the Astons a little bit lower. So I think Lando had himself a really good drive. And with that also being said, the driver who I think under-delivered is Fernando Alonso. I would put Lance Stroll in that category, but he did get himself taken out of the race and was just in a recovery for the rest of the night. It's kind of hard, and I'm almost giving him a little bit of a leeway to a degree in that sense. So I'm going to put Fernando Alonso in that category for now. But yeah, let me know what you think of my rankings, if you'd put anyone else in these categories that are over here. And hit the like button or subscribe if you want to see more of these videos, and I'll try and upload more. I do stream on Twitch quite regularly. We play a lot of management games over there, F1 Manager. We're heading into Season 7. It'll be my second season with McLaren. The link is, you can see the title right there. Logan Reed Media on Twitch. And yeah, it's gonna be fun. I hope you all have a great day. Take care.